Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with another 1/35 scale workable track link review and tutorial video. And for the topic of this video, we have here a set of workable track links for the Russian T54 and T55. This particular kit here is the one from Trumpeter, and it's kit number 02035, but it's also known as TK-05. The reason why I'm making this video here is because, well, I'm actually at the moment finishing up this 1/35 scale SU-122-54 kit from Miniart. This is the early production kit, which, by the way, this is an excellent model. It's actually one of the most detailed models I've ever come across in kit form. And this is something that, of course, is going to be the subject matter of its own independent model showcase video, which should hopefully be posted around the time this video drops. Regardless, in that video, I mentioned that this kit here is an excellent kit. However, the biggest Achilles heel are with the Caterpillar tracks. This kit does give you individual link and length, and as we know, that track method is complete crap. I hate it. I will never like it, and it's something that you will never see on this channel. So because of that, I had to go ahead and find a aftermarket solution to get this model fully fitted out properly with a decent pair of tracks. And fortunately for T55s, there are a few options on the market. Some are in plastic, some are in metal. For the purposes of this video over here, for this kit, I'm rolling with the set here from Trumpeter. Trumpeter released these tracks now for, I want to say, about 10 or so years. Trumpeter originally entered into the workable track link market in, I want to say, the early 2000s or so, but they actually did so under a different brand name. Towards the mid-2000s, they just straight up abandoned that and just made the workable track links under their own branding. And they've basically been doing that ever since. The range of workable track links aren't as wide as some of the other makers that are on the market. However, these tracks are a very good quality, and I actually came across another set of these, not for the T55, but I actually utilized their M1 Abrams track sets on another build I did a little while ago. Unfortunately, when I built that video, I wasn't making these review videos, so hopefully that's something I'll, revisit as time goes on. But regardless, they do have several track types available, and this one here specifically for the T55. One other thing I want to stress is that Trumpeter offers these same exact pattern tracks in two configurations. The first is the workable that we have here, and the other is just a standard individual link and length. And why this is extremely confusing is that both look almost identical in terms of packaging, graphic design, as well as with the verbiage on the box. The only difference between the two is that one here has the word workable written in all caps, as well as the model number. If you are just casually online and you're unaware of this, you could accidentally purchase the wrong track, and that's exactly what happened to me. I was on eBay, I found a set online, I purchased it. Unbeknownst to me, it was actually the static individual link and length, so I instantly noped out when they came in, boxed them up promptly, and sent them back to the vendor, to which I received my refund. The vendor did absolutely nothing wrong. He definitely clearly labeled it. It was my mistake because, again, I didn't pay attention to the verbiage on the box. So this is something that the purchaser must definitely pay attention to. As I mentioned before, this is TK-05, and the other item number is right over here, 02035. These tracks are still fairly common. I purchased these online, again, off of eBay, and I paid anywhere between $15 to about $25 US, more or less, with shipping and everything. So they are fairly common, and, we'll see how they build up on this build here. Starting with the graphic design and the box art, nothing really much to go over here. It's a very minimalistic type packaging. We have this brown cardboard paper type media. Here we have a little line drawing of a T62. We have here a illustration of the tracks in question, and we also have here just the basic verbiage. Side over here, we have a nice little graphic again of the track, Trumpeter logo. On the opposite side here, we have a little bit of corporate info. It's rated 14 plus. I should be more than capable enough at putting one of these together. And this particular packaging over here dates back to 2018. As I stated before, these tracks have been on the market longer than that. At some point, Trumpeter probably just updated the verbiage, and when they did that, they also updated the production date. Just like with the M1 tracks, these guys here are in a interesting type of packaging where it is a slide-out type envelope. Don't really see that often. And then you open it up, and the box is actually subdivided into two segments. We have here 2 bags of containing the actual track links themselves. I'll open them up momentarily. And we also have here several runners of just the track pins. Opening up the little baggie over here, dump out the track links, and you can see everything is molded in this rusty brownish red type color. These units are injection molded plastic. The color is very similar to like the AFV Club workable track links for the 2000 time frame, like the ones on the Patton as well as on the Shermans. The quality of the plastic looks to be pretty good. It's just typical trumpeter. The moldings look to be very nicely rendered. And definitely look the part of the track link in question. The most important aspect are the pins, and as you can see, the hinge locations are drilled out, which is exactly what you're looking for. As obviously, if they weren't, we're not going to be able to get them workable now, are we? Opening up the other bag. We'll reveal the other sprues, which are the pins. As you can see, they are really finely molded. Hopefully they can come out and focus. Here you can see right here. The track assembly themselves are very similar to the Riffield models Panzer III, Panzer IV links I did a little while ago, as well as the amusing hobby Luva German heavy tank kit that I also built in the past. Only on both of those examples, the track sets came with a little block that acted as an alignment jig, which allowed you to go ahead and line up a number of links and then pin them in a fairly quick manner. On this set over here, the alignment jig is not included, so you are going to have to just individually pin and link all of the tracks, which is really not anything that takes away from the actual track assembly itself or the quality of these parts. So I'm going to go ahead, clear off the table, and let's get the actual assembly started on this one. Okay, I'm just going to quickly interject here. This is obviously post-production John talking. I was mistaken with the earlier statement about the jig not being included with the set. Actually, it is, but it was in one of the bags I haven't opened yet at the time I was filming this video. So this is something that is going to make an appearance later on as the video continues. But I just wanted to bring that forth right now, just to let you know that yes, a jig is supplied with the set, and yes, it's actually very helpful. Anyway, let's continue with the video. In preparation to start the assembly, I went ahead and gathered the following tools that you see here on the table. The following tools are basically a good rule of thumb to what you will need to assemble most of the workable track links that are out there on the market. Some of them may not necessarily be utilized for this particular set over here, as I'm basically going in this for the first time with all of you, but as a rule of thumb, the following tools here are generally good ones to have in your toolbox, specifically if you're going to undertake not just workable track links, but basic modeling in general. So starting from left and moving our way right takes us to a bottle of super glue. I use Great Plains Pro Thick CA. This is my go-to glue, and I utilize it on basically all of my builds, from my 1/6 scale projects to my smaller scale projects. All of them are held together with Great Plains Pro Thick CA. The Thick CA is actually going to be really relevant for this particular project because on the pins, they do need to be glued in place, and if you use a thinner type glue, the glue can potentially run into the hinge, solidifying it, and if that happens, well, you don't have a workable link anymore now, do you? So the Thick CA is better in my opinion because it stays in place, it hardens where you want it, and it'll prevent any sort of collateral damage of the hinge getting locked up. The next is just some sandpaper. This is just some 400 grit wet dry sandpaper. Can be found in any hardware store. We have here a little miniature box cutter. This is one of those little snap blade type affairs. You can utilize a X-Acto knife for the same application. I just like utilizing these knives here because, well, you know, they're really, really affordable, and I can also change out the blades, and they work really well. They get dull, you snap it off, and now you have a fresh one right behind it, and then you can always refill the inner blades with replacement. So that's why I like utilizing these for my projects. The next we have here is a pin vise, and the bit inside is number 72. and hopefully it comes out on camera, but the size is 0.0250. This is an inch. I do not know what the millimeters of that is. However, I do have a link listed in the video description below to the vendor where I purchased these bits from. The next bit of equipment are a set of clean cut snips. This, by the way, is actually a very fresh pair. My other one is floating around the shop, but it was getting a little dull, so I decided to bust this one out of storage and utilize this for this build. For this application over here, a very fresh pair of clean cut snips are probably going to be a good idea because of the hinge section. You actually want to remove just the right amount of sprue and prevent any collateral damage. So that's what I'm utilizing for this. And here we have just a bottle of super solvent. This is in case there is an accident with the adhesive. This stuff here will dissolve the super glue, but it is plastic safe. So this is definitely something that I can't recommend enough. And I utilize it on, again, a number of my builds when I need to remove any sort of glue for one reason or another. And the final thing we have here are some needle files. Just a small set of generic needle files. These here I purchased off of Harbor Freight. However, basically all the tools that you see here on the table can be purchased off of Amazon.com, with the exception of the micro Dremel bit. That's something that is best acquired from the vendor that I mentioned earlier. Having said that, I will have links for the glue, the solvent, the cutter, the needle files, and potentially even the knife and the pin vise here. Amazon links in the video description listed below, just in case anyone is interested. And after not a whole lot of time, I was able to fully complete one set here of the tracks for the vehicle. I also went ahead and started the second set right here. Just like with all workable track links, it takes you about a dozen or so links until finally you get into your groove, and once you've figured out exactly the steps of assembly, the track assembly goes by very, very quickly. It's not uncommon for the second set to actually go together much more quickly compared to the first band. With the sections of sprue removed, you really get to see how the track link cleans up. Also, at this point here, I can remove it off of the assembly jig, and you get to see what the tracks look like, more or less, in their final format. They hinge together very well and articulate just as nicely. The assembly jig that is supplied with the kit does a decent job with lining up the track links in order to install the tiny little pins that we have right here, which, rest assured, I will show this in more depth in a second. However, it is not foolproof, and there are certain things that I personally encountered when trying to assemble this with the out-of-the-box format that lends itself for a little bit more complexity compared to this other format that I basically figured out during the course of construction that worked out a lot better in my experience. And I'm going to show this technique in this video. To start the assembly, the very first thing you need to do is to remove the track links from their runner sections. And this is probably the most labor-intensive aspect of the entire track assembly process. Fortunately, this is very easily done with a pair of clean-cut snips. Another thing that helps too is a cup, just so you could prevent any of these little bits of plastic from just running around all over the area and creating a bit of a mess. It's also helpful to have another cup on hand that is where you put the track links after you've removed all their little sprue sections. So basically you do that a bunch of times until you have a sufficient amount of track links that are fully deburred. Here go the links with the sprues removed. I'm just going to pour a couple here on the table. Okay, so if you're following the instructions, you're going to want to go ahead and insert a link on each and every one of these sections, which will then secure it in place, theoretically, and then allow you to put the pins in. And I did try that. However, I found that to be a bit problematic. First, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but every time I would line this thing up full of links, I would try to move it around in order to position it right for me to put the pins in. They would shift out of the way, and sometimes they would just pop out altogether. So it was actually slowing me down as opposed to speeding it up. The other thing that I noticed about this particular jig is that after about 5 or 6 or so links, The hinging tends to not really fit all that well on some of the ones towards the bottom. I don't know if maybe something is out of spec here on the jig or whatever, but regardless, if you try to just load this thing up to the max and then try to pin it together, it's actually going to slow you down. Me personally, the way I utilize is that I just assemble 2 links at a time, and this was a way to balance out the number of links found on the jig where it doesn't become overpowering, where you can't knock something out of the way. Also, it tends to have the links fit better, and it makes the alignment a bit easier compared to doing it with the kit format. Regardless, the jig is definitely instrumental with putting the things together. Now, if you, for whatever reason, do not have the jig, you can still pin them together. In fact, I was actually doing that on a few occasions here on the main section, and it can still be done. It is going to take not necessarily a little bit longer, but it's just a different way to go about it. Having said that, the jig is definitely a beneficial piece that this set does give you. So going back to the assembly, like I said before, I'm going to go ahead and assemble 2 links at a time. And the first thing you need to do is, even with the clean cut snips, you still have to deburr the piece fully. And this is where the sandpaper comes in. As you can see, you could probably see the burrs from on the hinge sections where the original sprues lined up, and obviously this is something that's less than ideal in this format because these areas here need to have just the right tolerances, or else the pins are not going to line up properly. So, best way to take care of this with some sandpaper, and you just go up and down the surfaces here, maybe go laterally a little bit, and you just do this until the piece just feels right. So this one here should be done. I'm going to do the same thing to the one on the opposite side. And basically, like I said before, this is the majority of work when it comes to assembly of these tracks. Good news is, once you get through all this, the assembly just cascades like a roller coaster. So once the deburring is done on the link, you then just drop it onto the corresponding location here on the jig. Like so. I'm going to do the same thing to the next link. No point getting that on screen, so we're just going to cut across to when the 2 links are lined up. Once the other link is all cleaned up, it's then time to drop it in place. But before I do, one thing I want to mention is you want to visually inspect the hinge work before you go ahead and drop the unit into the jig. Most of the links are properly molded, and they look really good with the way the holes here for the hinge are rendered out. Unfortunately, sometimes there may be just a little bit of flash in these sections over here, and this will inhibit the pin during its installation. And when you have like 3 or 4 links into it, that's the last thing you want to have happen to you. If it does happen, it's not a problem. With a small Dremel bit like I have over here and on a pin vise, you can just go in here and carefully just remove just this small amount of material, which will then open up the hinge, and then you can allow the pin to go in its appropriate manner. Once the pieces are inspected, you then just go ahead and you drop the links into their appropriate location. At this point here, it's time to install the pins. The pins, like I said before, are on this sprue over here, and I like the way these things are rendered out, in that on a lot of these other sets out there, the pins are molded into this section here of the sprue, and you have to basically carve away the entire sprue to get to them. On the trumpeter ones, they did you a favor by they molded the pin on the top portion here of this long stem. The stem is basically just a handle for you to manipulate it and to plug the unit in place. So it actually is very well engineered in that respect. You just simply snip them off of the sprue like I did here. And then at this point here, you're ready to install the pins in place. And this is where the glue is going to come in. Now, you can theoretically assemble these without the glue. However, I tried that, and although the tracks go together pretty quickly, the problem is the pins will work themselves loose, and the last thing you want to do is to have the track just disassemble on you just from basic handling, let alone for painting and installing on the vehicle. It's definitely not beneficial. So, the way to prevent this is by adding a small little drop of glue on this section of the pin. And this is also something you have to be careful with, because if you put the glue in the wrong spot, you're going to glue the link together, which is not exactly what you want to do for a workable track link set. So the way this works, and hopefully I'm going to be able to get this on camera, but if you see the pin in focus, you want to add a drop of glue towards the outer portion here on the pin. So let's see if I could do all of this in frame and in focus. That's it. Just that small little drop of glue. That's all you need. At that point there, I take the set, and with my other thumb, I press down on the links, which basically holds them in place. And this is why, again, when you have the full set, it's a bit tricky to do. So at that point there, I could just line it up and gently push in. It's going to make a snapping noise once it gets fully seated. Hopefully that came out on camera, and if you hear that little thump, that little snap, the pin now is fully seated into the hinge and it's all set. At that point there, just put the one in on the opposite side. Of course, you're going to want to add the drop of glue. Line it up and push it in. Also, when I was handling the piece, with these sections protruding out of them, they do become very prone to getting snagged, and that's exactly what happened over here. The one that I just installed popped off. However, you can see that it popped off at its correct break point, and the pin is still inside of the hinge section. And that's basically how I assemble it. From this point here, I'd grab 2 more links. I just rinse, wash, and repeat until this entire section is filled out. And once it's filled out, the next procedure is the one that you're going to see right now. Okay, so after the pieces have been deburred, the next thing I want, or I should say de-sprued, the next thing I want to do is to deburr it a little bit further. And that is simply done with just some sandpaper. I just take the sandpaper and I just run over the side sections of the track, and this will blend in, or I should say will deburr fully the pins that are now firmly secured in place. And by doing this, it will actually clean up the track a little bit and make it look a little bit more refined, shall we say. So you don't have to do this for long, just again like 2 or 3 passes is really all you need. And after a little bit of polishing, the track is all set. At this point here, I'm just going to go ahead and connect these 2 bands together. Unlike the main sections, or I should say unlike the other links before where you need the jig, this one here, the jig isn't really that important or necessary. However, I guess you could just like, yeah, join it like that and then use the jig for that. But, you know, that's up to your discretion. To pin them together, obviously I'm going to utilize the same technique that I used to assemble the links in the first place. Only when you're assembling a full set, or when the set gets longer, it becomes a little bit trickier, but again, it's not something that's impossible. Just want to make sure that the alignment is where it needs to be. And the piece is then plugged directly into place. Just like with the other sections, you want to let the pins fully set and dry before you simply snip them off and then polish them down like I did before. And there you go. We have now a good little chunk of track that's assembled. At this point, it's just like all workable, or I should say all track sets that are out there, rinse, wash, and repeat until finally you have a full set, like the one over here. When you get towards the end, you want to start test fitting the track onto the vehicle to make sure that you have the right length. If it's too tight or too saggy, this is something that needs to be adjusted. And once you have the first set, you now have a benchmark and you know exactly how long to make the second set. So that's basically all there is to it. At this point, you're basically on autopilot, and then we're off to paint and weathering. One other thing I want to mention about the assembly is that you may come across a link or two that may have some sludge in the hinge area, and it's going to prevent the pin from seating fully. This is one of those things that you're going to find out when it comes time when you're installing the pin. You're going to be pushing in a place, but it's not going to snap in like the other ones that I showed. It's just going to sit there, and if that's the case, it may seem like that the pin is fully in, but in actuality, it is not. And you're going to know this when you're done. You're going to, take the track segment off of the jig, and next it's going to Y off or fall apart on you. If that happens, fear not, you basically just drill out the pin that's already there with one of these Dremel bits, and then you could just rinse, wash, and repeat. But if you're going through the assembly and you're noticing that the pin isn't seating in fully, do not try to over install or over push the piece in place. It's just going to break off on the sprue. Instead, what you do is just yank the piece out, grab the Dremel bit here, and basically just carefully go in and drill it out. This is something that you definitely don't want to use a Dremel for because it'll remove too much material. And it's a very precise procedure. You just go ahead and just remove a little bit of material until finally the bit bottoms out. And when that happens, pull it out and the area is now ready to go for the pin installation. You then go through the pin installation the same way that you did before. A little bit of glue on the pin itself, and then it just snaps right in as it should intentionally. So basically you do the exact same thing on the other pins if you come across that type of a problem. Also, one other thing I want to mention is that if worst case scenario happens and the track link gets screwed up where the hinge gets mangled from the bit or some other type of mishap, fear not, you do have plenty of spares and extras on hand, so you can afford to lose a few links in case, you know, a few don't work out during the course of production. So here are the track bands now fully assembled. At this point here, they're ready to head off into paint. And one thing I briefly want to touch about paint is with the paint types that you can use on these tracks. Generally in my videos, specifically the ones that I talk about, the single piece vinyl tracks, you do not want to use enamels or rattle can spray paint to paint those because of the chance that the paint will have a negative effect on the rubber and it'll cause them to decay and deteriorate over time, or possibly even sooner. Well, for these here, you do have some more options because they are made from injection molded polystyrene. They are much more durable in regards to the type of paint that can be used. You can use Tamiya acrylics if you want, which will work just fine, or you can use what I'm going to be going with, which is a can of just rattle can spray paint. If you're going to spray paint your tracks, I like to utilize the cheap stuff right here. El Cheapo Flat Black. This is the stuff from the Home Depot. I also use this to paint the tanks too before, you know, as a coat of primer. This paint will work very well on these type of tracks. However, one paint that I would hazard against using are actually the premium brand stuffs, like the stuff from Rust-Oleum or Krylon. Oddly enough, the more expensive paints are some of the most harsh on these plastics, and I've had situations in the past where I utilized a can of Rust-Oleum on a plastic model of one flavor or another, not on the model itself, luckily, it was just on a parts runner, and it did have some effects on the molding and detailing, and it did make it a bit softer because of, again, just how harsh that paint actually is. So, if you are going to paint these tracks, roll with the cheap stuff, and you should be okay. The only time I would recommend utilizing the more expensive, harsher stuff is if the tracks are made out of metal. If that's the case, rock on. You know, they're impervious to basically anything. But if you're utilizing plastic tracks that are workable like this one here, standard El Cheapo Flat Black will do the job perfectly fine. And here we have the track fully painted and weathered, and this one here is ready for installation. Also at this time, you can see that I went ahead and installed the track already to this side of the vehicle, and now I'm going to go ahead and repeat the steps for the opposite side. I just want to say, these tracks are actually very, very frail once fully assembled, and they are very susceptible to kinking in this type of direction. So what I mean by that is, if you have the track like this, if it bends in half, the whole thing will just disassemble on you, and it'll cascade into a world of crap really, really quickly. So you want to avoid that at all costs. This is partly due to the small little pins that we have here. The pins are only grasping onto the track in two tiny little locations. It's not like on a real link where it's an entire pin going throughout the entire length of the hinge. Gives it much more stability and much more strength. This one here, you're only on those two little areas, so it is very, very frail. However, if you are careful and, you know, hopefully nothing falls on the track or something, you should be okay. So, like I said before, the track here was installed, and now I'm going to repeat the installation to this side. To do that, the first thing I did was I prepped the wheels. On the front idler wheel over here, you can see I scraped the paint off of this section. This will make the insertion and adjustment of the wheel at the appropriate time much more easily done. And also for the sprocket, here I have the pin, again, that's going to secure everything in place, and the paint has also been scratched off of this section as well. Another thing I want to reference is how hard it is on this particular type of vehicle to do this procedure, but this is true for all workable track links for this particular vehicle, being the SU-122-55. If this was a standard T55, it wouldn't be nearly as tricky. Just simply take the turret off and, you know, put it somewhere safe, and then this allows you to work on the hull. But with this one here, being a casemate design, specifically with this MG over here, it's a little bit more problematic, but it still can be done regardless. Although you do have to really be careful not to break anything. Also, as a side note, at this time, the one thing that I wisely left off of the build at this time are the side indicator lights, which will be fitted in these two areas over here. These are two bits of detailing that are just super frail. They'll break even by looking at them. So what on this build over here, these were left off, and I'm going to be installing them after the tracks were fitted. This is something I thought of when I was doing the build, and it looks like I was really smart for doing so. Because after just wrangling with the other track, oh yeah, there would have been no way in hell those pieces would have survived. So, but yeah, I'll be going over that info on the actual model showcase video for this build here. Back to the track installation. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to get the track positioned in a way where the two links line up and allow me to put the two pins in place. And this is best done either in the rear section or in the front, because these two areas here give you the most ample amount of room for your hands to work with. If it's obviously if it's on top, forget it. And if it's on the bottom over here, you can possibly pull it off, but it's a little bit more trickier dealing with the lower appendages here on the under hull. But whichever way works for you, that's probably the best way. So you can probably do on the underhull, the rear, and the front. And why this is relevant is you want to have the sprocket pre-timed onto the track, and then you could go ahead and line it up accordingly. By pre-timing the track onto the sprocket, this will prevent a bunch of issues, and will also help the alignment go by in a much more easier manner. The other thing you want to pay attention to is the track orientation. The tracks do have a chevron pattern to them, and they are not reversible. So generally on these T55 links, you have this little like frowny face. This would be pointing to the front of the vehicle, so basically going downward. And these two little house-shaped inlets, these would be like, you know, like you're looking at it like a house diagram, like that. So this here is the front of the pad. This here would be the bottom of the tank. And this is the orientation that you want. So at this point over here, I'm just going to go ahead and map out exactly where the track is going to be lined up. When you have that figured out, I went ahead and wrapped the track around the sprocket as such. And now from here, I could go ahead and get the peg for the sprocket inserted in place. Now, of course, this is specifically true for the Miniart version of the T55. Just going to go ahead, get the pin fully seated, like so. The other thing that I want to reference specifically in regards to the Miniart is with a pin vise, I drilled out this section over here of the final drive in order for the pin to fit in a easier manner. One thing about the Miniart kits is that the tolerances on some of the parts are pretty stiff, and by removing the material, it's going to be absolutely required just in order to get the parts to fit on in their appropriate manner. Otherwise, it's going to lead to some issues. So off camera, I went ahead and drilled this out with the pin vise, and now it's ready for the installation. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a drop of glue to the inner portion here of the final drive. Just a small little drop of glue. Obviously, that's going to be used to hold onto the axle when it comes time for installation. So here I have the track. I'll line it up. I'm going to seat it fully. This, by the way, is one of those things that are way easily done off camera. So bear that in mind. Okay, with that installed, I'm now going to install the idler. At this time, I'm not going to install any drop of glue on the idler. I'm just going to let it free float on the axle point right here. The reason why you don't want to add glue at this time will be explained momentarily. Okay, once that is in place, now I want to go ahead and get the track ready for joining. So now I'm getting the track sections ready to line up so I can put the pins in, and this is where the front idler wheel is absolutely important not to have any glue on it, because this will adjust the tension. So right now I actually went ahead and, like on the real one, I loosened the idler to its loosest point, and this will allow me now to have enough slack to get the tracks joined up correctly. And at this point here, I could go ahead, remove 2 of these little pins off of the sprue. And I'm going to install them in the same manner as I did earlier on during the assembly. Once you have the first pin in place, the second one will closely follow. It also helps to put a little bubble wrap on the table over here, so that when you flip the model over, it's protected and it just prevents any sort of unneeded damage. So here are the pins now fitted in place. Like I said before, it's really tricky to get on camera, so I had to quickly do this off camera, but you get the idea. So once the pins are in place, you just snip them off with the clean cut snips. And at this point here, you're now ready to set the track tension. So this takes us back to the idler. So I'm going to take some sort of a tool or a plier if you can't do it by hand, and you're going to manually adjust the front idler wheel. Making sure you have the right track tension. And once you have the correct tension that you're looking for, it's then time to glue the idler in place just to prevent it from getting loose on you over time. And to do this, I have some thin super glue right here. And I also have, for an applicator, going to be using a piece of wire. I'm going to be utilizing the Ninja Poison technique on adding the drop of glue to the correct location. Hopefully this comes out on camera. All you got to do, once the little drop goes into its little section over there, it'll get sucked up by the axle, and now the glue is going to set and your track tension is adjusted. At this point here, I can go ahead, add the hubcaps to the last 2 wheels, and then the suspension work on this model is fully completed. And with the hubcaps installed, you get to see what the completed track looks like on both sides. As you can see, the tracks look really, really good and really do polish up this build immensely. So now that I've went ahead and assembled a set of these and installed them on the tank and completing it, I can basically give my final opinions on the product. So these tracks, I want to say, are definitely not going to be for the faint of heart. They are very frail and very fiddly. They are similar to the Bronco Panther track that I assembled a number of builds ago, and are also very similar to the AFV Club patent tracks. And now, having said that, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are just running to the door right now as fast as they can, because those tracks have such a negative stigma to them. But these tracks here are very similar in that respect. If they go together pretty well, you do have to be careful. You have to pay attention to the holes if they line up properly on the hinge. If they don't, you are going to have to re-drill them out carefully with a pin vise and then reinstall the pins. Sometimes the link could be a total loss, but regardless, it can still be done. A bit fiddly, yes, but not impossible. So if you are, looking for a track solution out there, this is one to consider. However, if you are looking for a track solution that's very easy, this is not going to be it. You're probably going to want to swing more to something that's made out of metal, as it's far more durable and far more easily assembled compared to these plastic tracks here. However, they also cost double the price of these ones. So it's one of those exchange type things. Do you want simplicity, or do you want affordability? It's one of those type of avenues. These tracks are cheaper, but they will be a little bit more fiddly compared to the metal ones, which are more expensive but are easily built. So that's basically what you have. Plus side is, on the Miniart kit over here, they time perfectly with the sprocket without any sort of issues whatsoever. And if they time well on the sprocket on the Miniart, I'm pretty sure they'll also time on any other T55 on the market, being from Takom, Tamiya, or I think Eshi. I'm not sure. I haven't built an Eshi T55 before, so I'm not, don't quote me on that. But if it works on the Miniart one here, I don't see why it wouldn't work on those other examples. As for this particular build, well, now that the tracks have been installed in place, I can now continue with the remainder of the build, which from here, this model is going to be receiving its coat of varnish. Then I can go ahead and do the markings and continue with its overall completion. Of course, all this is going to be mentioned in the model showcase video for this particular build. And with that, that wraps up this workable track link review and tutorial video for the Trumpeter T55 pattern tracks. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new track tutorial and review videos like the one that you saw here, as well as the other more common content being small scale and large scale project update videos and model showcase videos. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There you'll see photographs of this particular build, as well as all the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. And furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again, and I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Take care.